I simply don't know where the money went. $1.2 billion. The CEO doesn't know, COO doesn't know, CFO doesn't know. What the hell are they doing up there?
Don't you smell a skunk in all this? I mean, I also read this and I was appalled. Why? Because John Corzine left the company in November. He resigned. And here we are, it's not even the end of the year, we're in December, and he says, oh, he doesn't know where the money went because he resigned. I mean, let's be real. He had all this time to spend this money, and yet he doesn't know where it went.
I want anybody who lost money to go after Corzine personally, the COO personally, the CFO personally, because I really think these people stole a ton of money. And that's what happened in 08 and 09. For instance, folks, when MF Global went belly up, who bought all the bonds at a few cents to $1? It's Chippy Morgan. It's another hedge fund. You know, I mean, yes, there's an opportunity there, but I want to understand how these things go on. I mean, you steal a loaf of bread, and the police comes, catches you, and throws you in prison. And here these people are openly looting everybody, and what do they get? Nothing.
Because it's so cleverly disguised with red tape under the guise of corporations, people do not have any real regulation for where and how this money is spent and what the results are. And so it gets so buried and becomes so difficult to unravel that it becomes a frustration point even for the government to try to figure out exactly what happened. And by the time they do, these people have already left and sailed out on golden parachutes with very little ability to prosecute them.
No. There should be there are laws out there. It's just that they don't apply them. I sincerely feel that some of these rich people have got fantastic lawyers who were ex-prosecutors and the others, and they make sure within their connections they have these settlements take place on the side. That's what is happening. And I'm very serious when I say this, that we are not going to go anywhere if we have these large behemoth companies. AT&T. Let's take AT&T wanted to merge with T-Mobile, right?
That's right. In fact, that was a huge story this week, folks. If you have been listening to the radio or watching the news, you can't get away from ads about this merger between AT&T and T-Mobile.
You know.
Yeah, and even it's kind of funny. I was reading the article in the Washington Post about what exactly went wrong. Here we are, two gigantic companies with all the money in the world and all the lobbying underneath them, and yet somehow they still failed. And they failed on messaging. They tried so hard to ram this message down everybody's throat about job creation. And even I thought when I first heard those radio commercials, they were not convincing to me. And I thought, something is not quite right with this equation. And sure enough, the SEC just was not going to let this happen. And in a way, it's kind of funny to see this same story happen to AT&T 30 years later. They were first broken up in the first place with an antitrust lawsuit many, many decades ago. And here we are again. They were trying to form another conglomerate that would have been essentially another antitrust scenario.
True. You know what the problem is? That they want to have no more than 3 or 4 companies in any space. It should be 20 companies.
I agree.
Really, the competition, the pricing will always come down if you have competition. If you have no competition, you turn around, you got Verizon, you got AT&T, and you got one more company. That's it.
I actually think there were 2 things. You're right. Ultimately, the antitrust officials looked at the facts of the case, and it began to trouble them more and more that eventually it would be just 2 carriers, AT&T and Verizon, that would potentially own 80% of the country's wireless market, which is why they shot this thing down. But the other story behind the scenes is, despite the media blitz, and these guys put ads everywhere in newspapers, iPads, mobile phones, radio, every format known to man, and they still didn't succeed. You have to at least feel good about this particular story.
That's true. And I started with John Corzine, who's a former governor of New Jersey. He was driving on New Jersey Turnpike, folks. His driver was driving at 95 miles per hour, and he was now wearing a belt. I mean, that shows the man's attitude. He doesn't think it'll hurt him.
And it's a metaphor for what he did with this company and with people's assets. He was in the fast lane, and he was reckless.
He wanted to be Goldman. He wanted to take MF Global to the heights of Goldman Sachs. And that was his undoing. But seriously, there are so many of those kind of folks that are in politics. They should not be there. We should have a little better... we're in spectator sports when it comes to politics, folks. We included. We don't really know so many of the facts about these people. President Obama, I mean, let's face it, no one in the history of the United States had a better opportunity to shine than President Obama. You remember Rahm Emanuel?
I do.
I mean, he was the chief of staff of President Obama. He said, no crisis should go to waste. Crisis is the time when presidents shine. And he did not do it. He went out bashing Republicans because he had a majority in the Senate, he had a majority in the House, and of course he lost.
Well, okay, so there's some fair criticism in that the president chose a bold and different agenda. I think for two reasons. He underestimated the problem with the economy, and two, he wanted to do something bold and big in the form of health care, thinking that is actually going to solve our economy problems. Now, here's the thing. I cannot fault the man for trying to be ambitious and trying to do something courageous and sweeping for this country. What I cannot stand is gridlock, that for the sake of gridlock, which is exactly what the Republican Party has done. No for the sake of no, just to watch this man in office fail, and that's the only agenda they have on the table. In fact, basically Mitch McConnell, leader of the Republican Party, set that to be the agenda and tone for the Republican Party. That's what I have a problem with.
Well, that also there. I mean, let's face it. If President Obama was a great leader, he could have pulled them in. The
frustration that you're feeling is becoming a symptomatic thing for the country. I read a very interesting article in the Washington Post Outlook section about red plates and blue plates. What do you think this article was about?
I don't know.
This article was about two very different companies, in this case Cracker Barrel and Whole Foods. And both companies are remarkably similar. Both were founded in 1980. Both have risen through the ranks, and actually, both are quite successful companies. But the people they cater to are decidedly different. Think about this, right? Think about the demographic split between the target market for Cracker Barrel, which is people who are good home country cooking kind of people, where you have blue plate specials and it's all about getting back to basics and home values, family values. Then you have Whole Foods, right? Decidedly new, green,
organic,
tree hugger. Yeah. You have, people who think in new ways, trying to adopt new mechanisms. And so you have
I know where you're going with this story.
It's a very different split for where the country, in fact, is going. And what you're seeing, in fact, is in very metropolitan areas, urban areas, Whole Foods has really taken root and done quite well. Here in the Washington, D.C. area, there's a brand new Whole Foods in Clarendon, which has done extremely well. Clarendon is a very posh part of town, very yuppie part of town. Cracker Barrel, on the other hand, is opening up shops just outside of these metropolis areas, trying to drive people out of the city back to this sort of idea of being out in the country, fresh food, fresh whole values kind of thing. So you see very quickly how our business environment and our social environment is very much mirroring what is happening in our economic environment.
Walmart also had all these stores outside of the Beltway. And the idea was that people who live outside the Beltway want to save money, because they want to buy a less expensive house or a less expensive car because they have to travel long distance to buy small cars. So they feel that Walmart in that neighborhood will always do better. But Walmart is now changing. They're opening 5 stores in the District of Columbia. Can you imagine that?
They've had to fight a long battle to get there, too.
Yeah, but the places, folks, they're opening is actually so that they are near the outside of Beltway people.
They're trying to drive
Northeast, Southeast, New York Avenue. I mean, places that are actually closer to Maryland and Virginia.
I think they're, instead of driving the city people out into the suburbs, they're trying to drive the suburb people back into the city.
That's right. And it's good. It's good for the city.
I think it is good for the city. Speaking of Walmart, though, it suffered quite a blow.